Welcome back, everyone. Glad you're all in your seats. Again, we're ready to take off. I would like to introduce our friend, Frank Bush from Teradata. He has been a long-term recent member, and I call it long-term recent because he's been around as a member of the advisory council as long as I've been involved with the center, I believe. And Frank has spent a good deal of his career in the travel and transportation space, and we're grateful to have him lead our group discussion today. The other thing I want to let you know is Frank and our speaker panelists have come up with some topics to discuss, but I'm going to move up to the middle of the room, and at some point Frank's going to let you know that we're opening it up for questions, and I just asked you to come down to me and grab the microphone and state your name and who you're with and ask your question. So Frank, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Brett. Great presentations. I got to tell you, I've been to a lot of conferences and things, and you kind of get droopy-eyed, and these were all really good. And in fact, they were so good. I was thinking, Mike, you've addressed almost everything in my list of questions, but I'm going to touch on a few topics that we've probably covered to some extent. And I think the one I want to really start with is the whole issue of historical data in the realm of revenue management and its importance in being able to look back, look at what the trends were, and then building those forecasting models and the demand. Laurie, I'm going to start with you. Given those changes that came out of COVID and that big, huge hole that was 2020 for the travel industry, what are some of your additional observations about how airlines, organizations have adapted to that fractured data going forward?
So I think one of the more innovative presentations I saw, or maybe the more open presentation, because you never know if people are talking or not, was from Air Canada. And they were talking about how on their forecast, the decision was pretty easy to move manual at the beginning, right? Because you had no historical data that was worth anything. But then the question becomes, when do you go back online, right? When do you actually transition to getting your historical forecast back? And they were doing on a market-by-market basis, which I thought was interesting in the sense that for some markets you were seeing more consistency, or let's say the Florida markets were probably ones, if you were in the US, that you were getting higher demand patterns or more consistency. And so when the forecasting accuracy was getting more accurate, it was time to flip it back on. And at least for me, it was, I don't know, I thought it was innovative because normally we just think about, I think, historical data and you have one switch you turn on. But for this one, it was really, markets are coming back differently. We have different patterns, I'm sure different hotels coming in as well. And so it really is more of this, the analyst has more influence than we think we've seen in the past, but we do want to get back to where the forecasts are coming.
Very good, thank you. So, Michael, you were talking about some of the different data sources you were bringing in as you were going through doing your revenue management work. How robustly were you able to integrate those into your day-to-day operations, or was it still really a fairly manual process?
Yeah, at first it was definitely manual. We did get that into our data warehouse where we could send some of those data and update some of our algorithms. I think a lot of what we did, we did definitely have a market-by-market approach in a lot of the price sensitivity modeling, but we really relied more heavily on short-term forecasting. So we went the route of neural network in the beginning to try to develop different algorithms. Revenue management systems could have up to 90 algorithms, and our market response model on every quarter could potentially choose which model would work best for which hotel. So I think just adding to the mix different algorithms that speak more to COVID, different third-party data sources that we could pipe in to the data sets, join them accordingly was a huge success in the beginning. It still didn't make it accurate, no matter what we did, especially in the beginning. But I will say historical data is coming back, at least for hospitality. We could rely on the short-term historical data to really predict our recovery levels. Outside of variants that happen, but that's where the data science should come in to try to be able to patch that up. But it's becoming to the level of recovery where historical data is starting to play a part. We never turned it off. We just let the system really choose which model would best represent that hotel at their recovery levels.
Okay. Eric, when you were doing your revenue management work, what were some of the challenges you found with the same problem with the holes in the data?
Well, there's quite a lot of them. They talk about turning the data back, turning the forecast back on. We did it, I wouldn't say market by market, but region by region. But even as you turn the data back on, it's not as simple as saying it's the forecast is on or the forecast is off, because you also have these human beings, these analysts, that are going to bludgeon the forecast as they've gotten used to doing over the last 2 years or so during this pandemic too. I mean, I spent decades trying to help our IT organization build a system that the analysts in the RM organization don't need to touch any more than they really should. And then, for all the right reasons, we had to say in March of 2020, okay, forget the system, start doing it all yourself, turn our RM system into a very expensive spreadsheet with business rules that the analysts are putting into it. And now, yeah, we're turning things back on, but now we got to get the analysts to take their hands off a little bit and start trusting things. Which goes back to the forecast accuracy measurement. If we can prove that the forecast is getting more and more accurate, then that helps with that. One other thing that I think is really a big challenge going forward is one of the key components of a forecast in most RM systems, and certainly ours, is seasonality. And usually we calculate seasonal patterns based on multiple years of history and averaging that, weighting it here and there where we need to. So now we're kind of stuck in this world where we got nothing to use for seasonality except 3-year-old plus data for several years now, or for a couple of years now anyways. It's going to be a challenge going forward, is to figure out how to get that sort of back on its feet again. So there's still work to be done to even though we're using the forecast now, there's still a lot of work to be done to make it as good as it needs to be.
Yeah. And Sergey, you mentioned that for you, the pandemic gave your guys kind of a break, and you got because there was less data coming in. What were some of the benefits that you realized? Were you able to better evaluate some models using the historical data you already had, kind of go back and tweak things? What are some of the other things that you were able to do?
Sure. So I'll provide maybe somewhat of an optimistic view. Even 2 or 3 year old data is not completely useless. We are big adopters, and Laurie did a lot of work on the customer choice modeling or discrete choice modeling, which tries to evaluate different options in front of the consumers and understand how people select between the morning flight and the afternoon flight. And if people selected this way 3 years ago, there's a big chance that we will select somewhat similar in the future as well. How do people select the first floor room versus the top floor room, right? So how much premium you can put on that. So that's one insight from even historical data that I believe we can get. And then another one, which is very recent trend, but all of us talked about how revenue management works. Most of our revenue management practices today are based on what we call booking data, which is what was purchased before. None of the systems on a technology level look at what we are calling shopping data, which means what is it what people are looking at right now, and that might address some of a seasonality concern. Now, this is a huge amount of data. You can imagine in airline industry, it's usually the ratio of 100 to 1. That's how many shops someone does versus one booking, right? So the data explodes. But nevertheless, now we are at the level of technology when we can collect and track how many shopping sessions are made across the whole industry for a particular market. And that might start giving us insight. In one study which we did, which is not quite revenue management, but just predicting the number of people who would travel from one city to another for the whole month, using that shopping data, we were significantly reducing the error, because we do have kind of an insight into the future already. How many people are shopping right now for a travel in July or the travel in October? And that helps with forecast accuracy.
Very good. And Zeke, so as we're looking out into the cargo world, what and you mentioned some of the additional data sources you used, but what did you, as one of your primary takeaways, what did you realize coming out of all of that?
Oh, so yeah, the more hyper-dynamic opportunity to pull in what the prices, what's happening in terms of pricing for that as one of the main inputs into a revenue management solution. There's some market information out there. So if we just look at air cargo, like World ACD is just a third-party provider, and IATA CAS, Cargo Account Settlement System. And so, but the thing is, it's aggregated and it's about a month behind. So what happened last month really doesn't matter too much about what's going to happen in the future anymore. So now there are some providers out there like TAC Index, the air cargo. It's not a really saucy name, but it sticks, right? And they provide more nearly real-time data on the air cargo indices. In the Baltic Index, they also have the Freightos provides an index on ocean container ship rates as well. So being able to pull, now that we have the technology, we can pull that type of information in more real time, and then you can have an adaptation for your revenue management of what those hurdle rates are going forward. If I may, I wanted to say something about the demand forecasting, something that is, you know, because it is such a challenge right now where you have, like everybody showed on their graphs up there, everything tanked, right? And so now what do you do when you have something that's looking at the demand forecast going forward? Maybe we forecast the people who are managing the demand. At least in my industries of transportation logistics, some of these folks stay in the industry for many, many decades. The companies stay in the industry for many, many decades. And so rather than forecasting the demand, you forecast, well, this person books this, or this company books this, but they show up with this. So when they call me up, I'm going to apply that deflation or that inflation factor on this person, on Bob, the booker. Something like that. So it's the actual, the forecast is at a different place than it is of actually forecasting the demand. Let the people who are making the request for you sort of a believability factor, something I haven't seen people do, but I thought it would be kind of cool.
So it's sort of like the airlines overbooking analytics, where they know people book, but then they don't show up, so they overbooked to make sure that they get to fill every seat.
That's right, and I've always encouraged, well, I wrote the technical specification for it to do some underbooking. Nobody ever took me up on it, but when people are over tendering all the time, it's a real concern when suddenly you have to choose who gets kicked off the boat. So sometimes you underbook.
Yep. So how difficult is it to incorporate things like customer preference? So I've done some work with some airlines where they're capturing clickstream data. It's great. They can go in, they can see who came to the website, what they look at, what was presented. The resultant data sets are incredibly complex JSON files that are nested and nested and nested. What are you guys seeing? And I'll start with Sergey. What are you seeing with that kind of data and being able to actually incorporate it into a system as opposed to sort of a one-off?
So here again, I'll try to be hopeful here. I don't have much of a proof points. What I talked about, and I truly see the fundamental shift with moving the data to the cloud, ability to manage data much more efficiently. Even inside of a big technology company, which Sabre is, we did have challenges merging different data sources from different systems, which are sitting in different technologies. That's always a challenge. And the data that you are talking about, the volumes are enormous, right? So even storing this costs a lot of money and much less querying and doing something on this. So moving to the cloud really enabled us doing it much more efficiently. Once you set up the proper practices there, the tools which are provided now are very good, and we don't need to do much of this sort of routine work to be able to manage it. We can start applying it. And we do see like the shopping data, which I talked about, which is what people are shopping for. We really start using it in the modeling customer choice, in adjusting pricing dynamically, because we can see what competition is doing for an airline. So that we really have examples where using that data does generate benefits for suppliers.
Very good. Laurie, what are your experiences?
Yeah, so I'm going to probably take a more methodological approach on this. Another area that I've been working on recently is the new advent of electrical vertical takeoff and landing aircraft colloquially known as flying cars. We're not supposed to call them that. But you can think of them as air taxis that literally will go within cities up to, let's say, 15, 25 miles. So you can imagine that if you're coming up with something like this, it's polarized. Either I'm going to really like it or not really like it. And we were doing a survey that was looking at the potential of taking these to the airport, which Eric might be interested in since United's, placed a pre-order for these. And there were so many people that either weren't taking it or were taking it. The data was just very difficult to work with. But as soon as we were able to say, look, not every person's the same. Not every visiting family and relative is going to have the same willingness to pay. Even when we do this segmentation, Laurie, am different than Eric traveling, even if we have, the same profile. So as soon as we brought in distributions of willingness to pay or preferences, the models really started giving intuitive results. So I'm more excited when we move to the cloud and are thinking not only on the complexity of the data, that we also are going to be able to bring in the distribution of preferences in ways that right now might be a little bit more computationally challenging. So for me, I think the solution is going to be both the data as well as coming up with richer behavioral models.
Very good. Any questions from the audience at this point? Yes. It's honey, right?
Thank you all for very interesting presentations and a very stimulating discussion. One thing that I noticed in virtually all the presentations, of course, the focus on the transaction, that last seat. It's essentially one piece that is being sold at that time and getting the most out of it. At one point, do you move from transactions to relationship? Where at one point does your loyalty sort of manager come into the picture? Because that sort of transaction that you may have lost now could be but because profit is not only with this one seat and that one transaction, of course, it's also down the road. And so where does that repeat behavior, if you wish, come into the picture? And sort of how do you reconcile these systems with the loyalty aspect of it?
Yeah. I think that's near and dear to my heart. I think the long-term value of a customer, especially your loyalty customers, is of utmost importance. That last room value for us, there's ways to have LRA rates for our highest tier loyalty members so that they're always able to book if there is a room available. So that's there. But where I see the future for loyalty is a little bit different. And I think just hospitality in general, in terms of moving from static to dynamic award charts and other ways of I think the general public is saying that they're being devalued in some way, that there needs to be a reinvigoration. And I think that will happen through personalized pricing. I think the systems will be as advanced to actually take your loyalty tier and your attributes from your history and to be able to stimulate benefits for your loyalty at the level of your loyalty number. So I see in the future, as we go through the customer journey, the capability of going down to that. In the shorter term, going down to buckets that are not necessarily just your loyalty level, but a little bit deeper ingrained in tiers within each loyalty level. That we could serve offers to, that we could offer personalizations to through the website. So I do think loyalty is a big component. And we currently do that today in terms of leaving allotments of rooms or last room value for our higher tier members.
Anyone else? Eric?
I would say that I'm a little maybe less comfortable than Michael is about getting into true personalization of pricing, because that starts to open some big questions. But the use of more and more trip attribute data to figure out what a customer's intent is is becoming more and more of something that we're focused on at United. And also, when you talk about rewarding loyalty with free seats or whatever, we have the ability to, that doesn't necessarily count for nothing in our RM system. We can take into account not just the money that we get from, say, a partner on mileage, but also the lifetime value of the customer, so that when we are determining how many seats to make available for awards for our Mileage Plus customers, it can be it can be weighted and valued more in our system than just the true transactional value of it at the time. So we do a lot of that, and yeah, the trying to better take into account the lifetime value of a customer is something that's very important to us.
Frank, if I may, just something to add from the transportation side of that is, it's sort of the opposite situation, really, where since there are a relatively few number of customers if we're looking at the carrier perspective, relatively few number of freight forwarders, third-party logistics who are providing the demand for that carrier. So we've had the struggle of getting carriers to be able to say no at that transactional level because that customer is so powerful and provides such great revenue. Then they say, hey, look, I know I'm giving you 3 times what I told you I was going to take on whatever departure this is, but we're buddies and you got to look out for me, and I'm going to continue to give you this revenue stream. There's a lot of power on the side of the customer there. So it's almost the reverse of where it's all about the relationship. It's all about the people who are the one who's on the phone calling.
Sergey, any comments?
Well, yeah, it's not an excuse, but an observation. I think travel industry, and here I agree with Eric, and maybe us as a society in general, it depends on personal taste, how much we are over-rotated into protecting personal information. But I do know that there's continuous conversation and continuous concern for anybody who deals with personal data and technology, and I know that because it happens on a daily basis with us. How much can we use that personal information to make these decisions, to calculate the customer value and so on? That's probably one of the big questions which somewhat slows down the development of truly personalization offer. But thinking about this, what might be possible is, and I know that technology solutions exist like this, but I don't know quite of application of science there, is considering travel agencies as customers or considering big corporations as customers and optimizing on that level of customers, some kind of programs. That is probably something that can be done, and I'm sure there is a lot of opportunities there to improve the value.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, we got one over here.
All right. Going under the idea of personalization, and I kind of recognize that there's probably not necessarily the appetite to go that personal, but one of the things that as we go, having visiting friends and relatives being the most significant part, it seems like the industry hasn't really done as much as other industries to personalize offerings. For instance, if on the 17th of July I send flowers, and I have done so consistently for the last 4 or 5 years, it would seem like a partner like FTD could co-market with you guys or an airline a specific offering between those 2 city pairs, couponing, because there's probably some reason why something happens the same day every year that requires flowers to be sent, such as your mother's birthday or something like that. If I, Google something having to do with cat dewormers, I get offers all over the place about cat foods and things like that for the next 16 hours to 16 days. And yet, I Google something that shows that I'm really interested in a Jimmy Buffett concert, peeps out of any carrier who says, oh, you know what? We can fly this person to Detroit because Jimmy Buffett's got us. Let's let's market. I'm thinking that might be the future of really personalizations combined with marketing, and I just wanted to get your takes on that.
I mean, it almost seems like, Sergey, you were talking about the ingestion of all the shopping data, touching on those sort of topics where you ingest it, you understand it, and you're actually able to systemize and use it that way.
I agree. It's an opportunity. Some things even easier. I booked family trip for 2 weeks in August for 10 years for 3 people, very consistently, with departure date and return date, right? And I never got an offer, hey, next year, you're probably going to go on another trip like this with the same family. But a little bit of optimism. We're literally working on a project right now where if you see a picture on your screen, you would be able to right-click on it, and in addition to, hey, identify what this picture is and so on, there's going to be a little button which says, get me there. And it will allow the seamless shopping and booking experience to get you to the beach that you like or the city view that you like. And that's what we are enabling. So initiatives like this are happening, and there is a recognition that this is something which has a lot of potential.
So you're going to start getting emails now with, things for other than cat food.
If I can just add one, I think I'm a little surprised you're not getting some of these emails already, so maybe we don't know you exist, but which is we need to find out more about you, obviously. But I think I want to draw a little bit of a line between, what we, at least in the airline revenue management, what we do is we focus on the price offer, and that's where it starts to get a little bit dicey if you want to consider personalization. I think that's kind of something that there might be a revenue opportunity there, but we're a little reluctant to touch that because that gets into all sorts of complicated issues. In terms of marketing and making the right offer show up in front of a customer based on something else that they're doing, there is definitely a lot of work going on in that area. It's not in my area of the company, so I can't give you a lot of details on it. I'd be probably making stuff up and getting it wrong, but that's definitely going on, and if you're not getting it, then we need to work a little harder, I guess.
So I've got a question on the sort of the booking transactions, all the data flow. I've spoken with folks at the airlines that are seeing a very dramatic shift in the channel through which the bookings are coming. So traditionally, there's been a lot of shared market data. You can see who's flying in which markets, what their market share is. Some of that's going away. Are you seeing the impact of a channel shift in the revenue management systems?
Yeah, I mean, in hospitality in 2020, we did more hotel direct business because virtually most of our customers wanted to see what's going on at the hotel. What is opened? What is not open? Is food and beverage there? Is the breakfast buffet? So when you look at the channel data from 2020, hotel direct as a channel increased to its largest amount from a mix perspective that we've ever seen. As openings started to occur, things started to open, COVID restrictions started to release, we've definitely seen a very sharp move towards more direct channels. And I think the comfort level of understanding the cleanliness factor, getting more information of the hotel, what they're doing around their programs for that is driving some of that direct. I also think we're doing effectively on the marketing front as well. So we are seeing an inherent shift towards direct. I think when I look at data from Calibri and I look at data from TravelClick and Amadeus, I think it's a defined move across the industry.
Do you think that's going to stay that way, or do you think it's going to kind of slowly revert back to where it was, or is it, sort of like Bill Gates,
Yeah, a lot of it's geographic. I mean, in aggregate, it's easy to say, hey, we're moving more direct. versus our indirect channels or our third parties or our OTAs. I think there are certain markets that are going to be heavily reliant on OTAs for various reasons. And for those, I wouldn't recommend a direct at all costs methodology or strategy. So I really think it's defined by market specifically and what the dynamics of that market is. I do think it will normalize as all of our channels start coming back and our segmentation starts to normalize a little bit, but I think hotels also have to make a choice. I mean, if we have some resorts that have good meeting space that have been the most profitable they've ever been, do they need to rethink what their optimal mix is of the future, right? And I think every hotel has to go and do some soul searching and say, just because I have said that this optimal mix has worked for me for the last 30 years, there are going to be different defined things in travel. We didn't get this boost in leisure travel without creating new customers. And I think the pent-up demand from everyone sitting in their house for 2 years has opened up a whole new leisure segmentation that really didn't exist because there is no way we can be 20 to 30 percentage points up on leisure business without reaching out and activating new segments. So I really think everyone has to take a look at their optimal mix and what is optimal mix at these rates that we're getting for the business now and do what's most profitable for each hotel.
Very good. Laurie, I thought, did you have a comment?
No, I just had a thought in terms of with the leisure business being very strong right now versus business, sometimes going back to who is your customer, if you have a corporate contract, for instance, you're required to go through a travel agency. I think when I go for Georgia Tech Business, I actually just asked my assistant today whether or not I had to book through our travel agency or not, because I don't know what the policy is. During COVID, it was that or not. So while I agree that the trends will go, I think it'll be interesting when the business comes back to see if we see a mix shift, just based on the corporate policies.
Eric, any thoughts?
Not too much to add. Business is coming back, by the way. I mean, we're at the point now where it's actually going to be very interesting to see how much of this is pent-up business, and maybe it's going to lull back down. I don't know, but we're at the point now where what you're talking about is already happening. But, yeah.
And certainly a lot of the leisure travelers, when they're not traveling for leisure, travel for business. And because of the ability to travel, they may encourage their companies to allow them to do more. But
Logistics side, it's a business to people, business to business, but it's people working at those businesses. So I don't know whether anyone in the room has ever had a reason to go to, say, a trucking company's website or a freight forwarder or a third-party logistic, but when you, say, try to make a booking online, it says, fill out this information and someone will get back to you right away. I mean, so there is a huge opportunity, and those who are sort of the industry leading right now saw that this need to happen, the ability for a human to interact with a computer and get a booking and be able to get a rate. So that's really going to take off in logistics.
Yep. Any other questions?
Frank, we have a question up here.
Okay.
Thank you, Brett, and good afternoon. You know, well, my name is Jonathan Shaver. My background's more on the transportation of physical goods and technology, but my question's for the panel. You know, COVID had such a different impact on whether people were transporting versus goods were transporting. One's demand went down while the other demand skyrocketed. And as the economy looking forward over the next 12, 24, maybe even 36 months, my own personal opinion, even though I also try to be an optimist, is a little bit concerning. And so my question to the panel is, if the economy runs into some challenges here in the U.S., whether it be called a recession or whatever else it is, how do you, on the transportation side, think it'll impact revenues, which has been really very carrier pro revenue in the last 24 months until maybe recently, and then on the transportation of people side, how prepared is the industry if the economics of the situation aren't positive here in the next 12 to 24 months? Thank you.
Who wants to take that?
Well, I guess
Eric, it's you.
I will say that one thing that has been good, and we talked earlier about, we don't like to talk about things being good about COVID, but there are some things that we learned. And one thing that we've learned was, and particularly that United did quite well for reasons out of my control, and I can't claim any credit for it, is transitioning from pure passenger demand with just a little bit of cargo on the side to an airline that really leaned into cargo and made up for, by no means most of it, but a much bigger chunk of the revenue loss that we saw on the passenger side was made up for in cargo than I would have ever imagined to be possible. And so at least we come out of that having learned a lot about adjusting capacity where we can and where we should, and also about leaning a little bit more into cargo because passenger volumes are down. And so we are coming out of that in a better position to adapt to something like that in the near future than I think we would have been before this.
Question over here?
All right. Let me just quickly add to that point, because I almost echo what Eric is saying, but we also do a lot of work on network planning and scheduling, and that was one of our observations. In scheduling, airlines follow a very rigid process where they start scheduling, developing network 12 months in advance, and they go through very robust set of procedures. And COVID obviously threw all of this out of the window, and airlines had to react very quickly, ramping schedules up, bringing them down, canceling some markets, moving into other markets. And what they learned is that it's actually possible. This is what we hear from the folks who are just doing scheduling, because it's not just schedule, right? So you can prepare a schedule fairly fast, but then you need to operate it. And that means pilots and flight attendants and mechanics and airport operations, all of that. And they were able to do much better than what they were afraid of. Now, all of them want to go back to the normal operation, so they don't have to duct tape and all of that. But the learning there was it's possible to be much more dynamic. So if something happens, what I hope is going to happen is airlines learn how to adopt and adjust, and maybe some of even commercial models in hospitality can be applied for other disturbances, not necessarily COVID only.
So I'll follow up real briefly on the capacity issue. So the airlines clearly can, park an airplane on pretty short notice. You can't park a hotel. Zeke and Michael, and we'll start with Michael. I mean, how did you deal with the capacity issue? And I know you touched on it in the slides, but that's a huge issue.
Yeah, I mean, at first, it went by chain scale. Luxury hotels close first. Those are going to be the most expensive to run. And in least demand, and then all the way down onto the economy segment, which we don't play in, but those hotels virtually stayed open. The roadside interstate hotels. As things started coming up, I'd say, and we started building up in terms of capacity, there wasn't a lot of demand for the capacity that we did have. Certain hotels we stayed open in terms of our flagships to really help with healthcare. We actually had hotels that were designated as quarantine hotels at certain periods. And I think the biggest thing that we continue to see is capping due to labor. Inflation is real. I think we know that. I know it started off as saying it's transitory, but at this point, it looks like it's here. Wages are up. A lot of people at the hotel level have left the industry to the likes of Amazon Warehouse Distributing and other things. So it gets to the point where we see operators capping the number of rooms because we don't have enough people to clean the rooms. And then how do we have an effective revenue management strategy when rooms are being capped at certain levels? So we have audit processes in place, but it really starts with us as well, because if we do a better job forecasting and revenue management, then they'll know how to apply that labor in operations and try to meet the needs. But at certain points of the pandemic, when we were literally sitting with an average lead time of 4 nights, when we used to have an average lead time of 25 nights for that same hotel, a little bit different in order of understanding where we're going to truly be at the operational level. So we're 99% open. We still see room capping in certain areas, especially in areas where labor is just tight and critical. And we just have to do the best to optimize with what we do have.
I think we've got a question over here. We have a...
This is really Zeke for you. It's another dimension of capacity. In freight, we've come through 2 to 3 years of capacity constraint in every single mode, at every node on the supply some may be easing.
I think so.
Some may be easing, but every dimension of the purchase criteria, service quality, waiting, dwell time, you name it, has been distorted. When you look at how does that forecast into revenue for the future, I'm not asking you to solve the capacity problem, but every single dimension of a purchase decision has been distorted because of capacity. How do you address that?
Yeah. So this kind of comes back to the question about what the economy might mean. You bring this up about service. There's the old saw about you should always be better rather than cheaper, and this is something that's been talked about for a long time in the freight conferences. Is this commoditized? Is this service that we're providing in freight, is this commoditized? And we really need to combat that. There always need to be value-added services so that there is a value for this particular carrier, or if you're using a freight forwarder or one of the asset-light players, that there is a true value-added service. Like, for example, a simple example is in the pharmaceuticals. You either have the cold chain or you're not. You're certified to be able to move pharmaceuticals and clinical trials around, or you're not. But for every type of freight, the better service that you provide, and if you are providing an additional value, that's going to make your capacity a better capacity in the eyes of your customers. Talking about just the capacity constraints overall, I'll just talk in terms of top 50. There were 3 different top 50 trucking carriers that I was talking with sequentially, and the CEO of one of them, she said that her goal was to have 50% of their demand carried by third-party providers, so folks who might own a truck or two. So outsource that to the brokerage type. I told this story to another top 50 carrier, and he said, yeah, we're pretty much like that, only for us, we want 90%. And these are decades in existence of carriers whose their pride is their fleet. And now that trend was, I want other people to have that depreciating asset on their books, and I want to be the technology provider who hooks up the supply with the demand. I don't need thousands of power units. I have the industry know-how. So famously, one final example, I guess famously now that Yellow Freight has got the $700 million from the CARES Act and put $400 million of that into their fleet upgrades, because they said, if we're going to be competitive, we have all these assets out there. We are known as an asset-driven carrier. We need to spend this money on enhancing our fleet, getting better mileage, getting better fuel, all of these types of things. So the capacity is huge, tied in with that service that they provide.
Okay. Can I frame it as sort of a question? All right. So as you add your closing comments, what about data's last mile? There's lots of systems out there, lots of data. What I'm seeing is the analysts are still struggling with getting at curated data that they can use in their models every day and just do the analytics and the reporting. What are you seeing as part of your closing comments? And we can start here. Sorry, Eric.
We were talking about this earlier. That is the hard part. If you run a marathon, that last mile is by far the hardest mile. We got crazy amounts of data that, not just now, we've had it for quite a bit, that we've not, I would argue we have not made the best use we possibly could out of it. And it's a continuing challenge. We are leaning into cloud technology to make data that was previously in siloed locations that was hard for people around our company to get to, more centralized so that everybody has access to the same data. We are trying very hard to standardize and build out all the correct, I'm forgetting the word, but the terminology around the data so that people can understand how to use the data from this other department better than today. There's a lot that we're working on to make it more accessible and more usable, but that is the hard part. The data's there, but making it usable is a lot harder than getting it there, in my mind.
So I'd agree. I think this is a continuous process of improving, and it's absolutely vital to make the last mile convenient and to get people who really control the industry, the analysts, the managers, to be confident in this system, because that's what their job, right? So they need to do this job. And if they don't trust the technology or they don't trust the insights from the data, it becomes useless. There is continuous attempts to improve on it. There is the whole area of artificial intelligence is explainable AI, and now the tools are coming up which try to automate these tasks. But yeah, we have the long road to go there, and it's probably going to be an evolution. Which is, if I add to closing comments in a little bit more generic, travel industry is a fascinating industry. It's very complicated. There's a lot of opportunities for doing very deep research on the optimization or forecasting or science or on policies and practices. And yeah, and one of folks who invited me into Sabre a long time ago, he said, well, this thing is changing every 10 years. So even if you figure out now what to do, 10 years from now, it's going to be a different one again. So it's a continuous evolution.
Yeah, I agree. Travel industry aviation is exciting, and one of the reasons I've stayed in it. I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on this, and it goes back to a comment that Sergey actually made to me about a year ago, in terms of the last mile for me is the last mile of getting data into students' hands, right, to be able to do dissertations. And as we move to the cloud and compile data sets from other companies, it becomes easier then to just create an instance, right, for the students or something that, well, anyway, if they've compiled the data, it becomes a lot easier to share it, versus now it's been very manual and taken a long time to do it. And from the Aggie Force perspective, another comment that was made to me is that some of the fields have gotten so complex, crew scheduling being one of those, in terms of all the rules that you have to go through to make sure, your connections, are valid, or what have you. But it's gotten so complicated that it is actually preventing the entry of PhD students into that field. A way it was phrased to me is, you need a postdoc now to come in to be able to do it. So in terms of a last mile, then that raises a question in my mind is, like, can Aggie Force as an organization help do something to create problem instances or solve some of these issues that are data-driven on the beginning that are preventing the entry of students or people coming in? So I'm trying to think about it from a perspective of, are these new cloud technologies, whatever it is, or the data sources coming on, are the ways we can create problem instances to help move the field forward?
So I'll just touch briefly on that, but I know some pilots for the commercial airlines who would love to have that work done, because they're constantly complaining to me about their schedules and how they get bumped around and changed on flights and all of that. Anyway, well, Michael?
Yeah, I'd say, for me, for the last 20 years, my company has been very heavy in terms of proprietary building of software. I think the future is really focusing on partnering with third-party world-class technology providers, while focusing on what we do best. I think our data and analytics teams and our data teams are too busy upkeeping source systems that could be better advanced through the third-party market, and picking partners to work with that can get us there. Then we can embed analytics groups and productize the data assets that we do have, which typically come in better form when you do have a third-party system in for certain things. So I'm really excited about the future and the partnerships around some of our main systems. I also think self-service analytics needs to be a cultural change in companies. We're piloting things like ThoughtSpot, for example, which really is self-service analytics using natural language processing that, you don't need to be a database architect or an analyst that's proficient in SQL to get answers quickly to questions that would typically go to an analytics group. So I think there's lots of opportunities. It's not the curated visual storytelling of Tableau or Power BI. I think that still serves a very big purpose in industry to really get data in a certain way to tell a story. But I do think we all in hospitality need to build a culture of self-service analytics and have data cubes out there with new and bright technology so that we can start building that culture, because that's important. Everyone needs to understand the basics through it. And I think natural language processing and some of the things to come around that through AI and machine learning will help us turn a sales manager or other departments that are not technical into better analysts of their own business.
So final mile is a thing in logistics, right? Where everybody here gets packages delivered to their houses, and previously, maybe the normal average Joe could have named about 3 companies that might do that for you. Now, I don't know if anyone has heard of LaserShip and OnTrack on the 2 coasts of the country. They just merged $1.5 billion now. So we're going to be seeing more players in that space, and that final mile logistics of delivery is a great big area of investment. So for my final remarks is I gave the example about please enter your information and someone from our team will get back to you right away. That is the reality of the current state. And a lot of the players in the logistics space, there is a huge amount of investment going on. So it is going to be a changing world where we're going to see different companies delivering our packages, and we are going to see a change in the way that industry works. In the way I think that when we all went from having paper tickets walking up, and now we all use our app to fly on an airplane, we're going to be seeing that coming really soon, much more quickly, I think.
And drones are going to fill that last mile for you guys. All right. Well, thank you. This is great.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Frank for leading our panelists, Eric, Sergey, Laurie, Michael, and Zeke. So thank you for being here today. I think my final comments, because we're in the football room, I'm looking at the goals and the values up here, and I'm thinking this is probably relevant. Let's just go to the first goal. Let's say consistently prepare for victory. I think you all need to do that in your field. So thanks again. For those of you joining us for the Business Advisory Council meeting, members and guests, if you go to the lobby, we'll show you how to get to your next destination. But thank you again for joining us today. Take care.
I know that I need you now.
And panelists, we have a picture to take. One other announcement. Sorry, this is the most obvious announcement of the day. We do have our Patterson lecture back in this room. If you're able to stick around and join us at 7:30 with Ed Bashan, the CEO of Delta Airlines. So I hope you can join us back here for that. Thanks so much.
Places we would go, all the songs we got to know.